Welcome back, everyone, to Bounce Off, the #1 podcast for SlamBall coverage in the world. I am your host, Sam Roberts. You can find me on social media at Quantum Roberts. That is Quantum Roberts on X, if you want to call it that. What we do live coverage of games when I'm awake, because if it's a different time zone, or on Instagram or on TikTok, where we occasionally post clips from, how the games have gone. I'm going to address that this is here because I meant to move out of the way because it's slightly embarrassing, but I'm diabetic and Prime has got very low carbs and is, tastes sweet. So I'll move that though because they're not a sponsor. No one's a sponsor. If you want a sponsor. This episode is going to look at last night's SlamBall action, and I cannot believe I've started talking about a drink when we had a bit of history making in last night's SlamBall, guys. Gage Smith makes SlamBall history, the Buzz stay scrappy, and the mob dominance continues. Those are the headlines after Saturday night's games, and we will get into all of that in this episode. Then we'll do a little bit of a preview looking towards tonight's matchups as well, and that's going to be us, guys. I don't know how long this one's going to be, hopefully a little bit shorter, because I think I've got stuff to do today, we shall see. But minimum, you've got me here to talk about Buzz versus Slashers, Mob versus Gryphs, and then Buzz versus Mob again in the main event. All of these were decent matches. Stuff to look into, stuff to see from them, even if not necessarily, all of them were close. In fact, none of them were close, really, when it came down to the final score. But there's stuff to take away from all of them. And we will start with the opening match of night. Start from the beginning, and then we move on from there. That's how these things make sense. With Buzz versus Slashers, this game ended 54-37 in favor of the Buzz. Couple of notes on both teams to start out. Both of these teams are very scrappy defensively. They are everywhere on that end. They're trying to get at loose balls. They're trying to poke balls away. They're trying to get in your face on the perimeter. Really, really good. The difference between the two is that it feels like the Buzz have a definitive, stronger defensive strategy going into games. We'll talk about it a little bit more when we get into their game against the Mob, because Coach Planell sort of laid out exactly what the strategy is. But in this game, they have, they have this strategy, which is a lot of double team Tony Crosby II and make other guys beat you, which works quite well. We will get into that in a moment. And they also have their first choice stopper, which is a big thing. Taekwon Scott is a first round draft pick playing at stopper versus the Slashers, who we find out Amir Smith, who's playing stopper for them, is out with a knee injury on this day. So Nathan Karstjens has to step in for him. And I thought he looked a little bit rough in the last game. Karstjens ended up playing a lot more minutes than he usually does. And I was curious if that was because there was something wrong with Amir Smith. Karstjens does fine. He gets 6 stops in the game. But he just cannot keep up with the Buzz players in terms of either physicality or their desire to drive straight to the basket or the height that they can get on bounces around that bottom tramp. And it's just, he can't keep up with that. So, yeah, the Buzz have a much clearer defensive strategy going on versus the Slashers' identity. And having a starting stopper is great. They also got a lot more LBRs. So it was a 9-point spread in terms of LBRs, 27-18 in favor of the Buzz. The way that Coach TA said on commentary, he was like, the LBR stat is the most important stat in SlamBall because it gets you other possessions. And this is true, but I need to have it explained what constitutes an LBR and what doesn't. Because in my mind, you should be getting a lot of LBRs because you're getting loose balls within your own tramp when you disrupt the other team's offense, which is why the majority of players that have the highest LBRs are stopper position, right? Starting stoppers, because they are always in the tramps, always mixing up, and then they have first right basically to go after the loose balls that they create. So, in my mind, LBRs should be high for teams, especially their stopper, because that's the equivalent to, in basketball, defensive rebounds, which the weird thing about defensive rebounds is you should be getting them. And if you're getting them, that's the baseline. And if you're not getting them, something's gone horribly wrong. So I need to understand a little bit better about how LBRs work in that respect. And I don't think they're going to do it, but it would be interesting if they were doing if they could do offensive and defensive LBRs. That would be a lot of work for a stats team that's already getting criticism from players for not getting everything 100% correct. So I think that the LBR stat that regardless, having more of them shows that you're going to get more bites of the apple at scoring. So that's a good thing for the Buzz versus the Slashers in this game as well. A quick note on the Slashers team. Tony Crosby playing and not feeling like he's the story of the night is in itself impressive. And that is due to the defensive strategy that the Buzz ran on him for the majority of this game. I feel like they let up a little bit in the last quarter, but that's because they were already up by enough. But Crosby ends with 19 points, 3 hits, and 3 assists. So he was still trying to do his thing defensively. If he's getting, he gets 2 hits in his sleep. So he's still doing his thing there. But scoring, he basically breaks 20 points every game. And to force him not to do that, obviously 19 is very close. But to force him not to do that is very impressive. The biggest concern that the Slashers head coach, Coach Stan Fletcher, was going on about was when Tony Crosby II was getting in, he was creating a threat that Tyquan Scott had to pay attention to. And so there were opportunities for a weak side lob that his team weren't taking advantage of. And that was with Tony Crosby going in, but it was also within the play that they were just running in and of itself. They were getting guys in positions to score around Tyquan Scott, and they were not able to complete those passes. And that's what he was getting really annoyed at, was that you guys are playing well enough that you're drawing the attention of the stopper. You're not playing well enough that you're getting the passes off, and that was his big concern. And I think that is a major thing. If you're playing against a defense as good as the Buzz, and they are making it hard for you to score, when you then get the opportunity to score, you cannot miss that chance, right? You need to put ball in basket. And in order to do that, you need to complete passes that are there. So that wasn't great. I'm just gonna wax lyrical about the Buzz for a little bit and what they did in this game. So we talked about they double teamed Tony Crosby II, which forced Alonzo Scott Jr. To attack a lot more. And early in the first quarter, that was actually working for him, right? To be fair to Alonzo Scott, him just going straight at Tyquan Scott, the Buzz stopper, him just going straight at him hard and fast was enough to get him some points early on. But even by the end of that first quarter, Tyquan was now at the level where, like, the note I wrote down while this was going on was, this is great, but Tyquan Scott's not going to let you do that the whole game. And by the end of the quarter, he was already starting to get in Alonzo Scott's face a lot more in the air. So the strategy was double team Tony Crosby II, don't let him get into the tramps so he can create or so he can be an offensive threat. Force Alonzo Scott to try and beat you, and force him and Brad Laubacher to try and play a two-man game, which is what Brad's typically doing with Tony Crosby II. Alonzo Scott, Brad Laubacher, not as on the same page as Laubacher and Crosby, so it doesn't go as well, right? If we're looking at the results of this strategy, yes, Tony Crosby still ended up with 19. Yes, Alonzo Scott ended up with 14. But of the 3 other players that played in this game for the Slashers, they totaled 4 points. And Laubacher and Alonzo Scott each ended the game with 5 turnovers apiece. So the strategy, you look at it at the end and you go, well, you still had 2 guys who scored double digits. Yeah, but I talked about yesterday, you need 3 guys to score double digits, or you need a guy to score 30, and they've stopped either of those from happening. And so you're more than likely going to win if you can get to that situation. So really good defensive strategy from them. Something that I was critical of early on this season, and I will need to go back and review to see if I was wrong or if this is a development that's happened over time, is I said that Tyquan Scott was not very good at disrupting an offense in the bottom tramp. And maybe it's just that I needed it to be laid out exactly, here is the bits and pieces, this is how it works. But Trevor Anderson, head coach of the Ozone, he was the guest commentator last night. I've been liking having the coaches as commentary. I don't know how feasible it is long term, but I do like it as here's the insight for the game from guys who are heavily involved in it right now. So what Trevor Anderson was explaining on commentary was and again, this then made me focus on it more. So it could be that I've missed this throughout the season, but this is what Trevor Anderson was pointing out about Tyquan Scott's defense for offensive movement coming in the bottom tramp, which I'd like to point out again because it comes up regularly. The Slashers offense so far has been very predicated on using that bottom tramp. Getting 2 cutters in, then making a lob over the top. And so being able to disrupt that is super important. And what was being pointed out by Trevor Anderson was that the key to stopping some of that, and the key to being a stopper in general, is the second bounce, right? Whoever gets the second bounce is either killing the first guy's bounce, which is what you want to do as a stopper, or using the momentum from that first person's bounce to go up. So if you're the stopper and you jump in early, you're the first bounce, offensive player is going to be the second bounce, they're going to get the advantage in the air. If you're the stopper and you wait patiently until the guy comes into your bottom tramp and you time your jump accurately, you are the second bounce, you've got a better chance of getting up there, right? So that's what TA was talking about in terms of that's what Taekwon Scott was doing. And while he was explaining that, there was a couple of times where he was explaining that where Taekwon Scott then disrupted an entire offensive possession from the Slashers, where particularly against Tony Crosby II, when Tony was able to get inside and get around the island in the bottom tramp, he wasn't able to get anything off against Taekwon Scott because of all the timing that he was getting basically perfectly to get his second jump in with Tony Crosby II, then get back out of the tramp so that he could get back in to do a second jump again. And what was pointed out was, from TA, that this is an effective defense against the Slashers who love to do stuff in the bottom tramp. The solution to it is that Tony Crosby II has to be more of an offensive threat that Taekwon Scott has to pay attention to, and he needs to start jumping from the top tramp and making plays in order to create that threat. And he started to do that throughout the game, and when he was doing that, it was effective. There was just not enough time to be able to run that sort of play and get the score back to where they wanted it when they'd gone down by so much in the game already. So there is a strategy to stopping the second bounce defense, and that's by being fast and aggressive and hard from the top tramp, which is fine. But if the perimeter defense is as good as the Buzz were making it, your best players at coming from the top tramp aren't going to be able to do it. And secondly, I've already talked about Taekwon Scott is really good at stopping drives and 90% of single cuts. So yeah, if he's getting that double bounce, like I say, I don't know if he's been doing that earlier this season. Maybe I'm wrong, he has been. But if he's getting the second bounce thing down pat, perfect. That means that he's going to be even harder to get past on the defensive end, or for the offense to get past him. And yeah, I think that, you know, Tony Crosby II showed he can dunk over Taekwon Scott, but it's not an accurate science to say that's always going to be there. Okay. Like I said earlier, Alonzo Scott was able to get some scores on him in the first quarter, but that went away by the end of that quarter because Taekwon Scott is just too physical in the air. This game overall and that strategy is a prequel for what what the Buzz are going to do to the mob in the main event. My goodness, so many words and phrases and things, and my mouth is just bleh. I need more of this delicious pink liquid that we talked about. That could mean something else. Anyway, so double team Tony Crosby II was a strategy. Let the other players get inside and then try and disrupt them from inside, either cuts, drives, or try and deflect passes from on the island, okay? And that was the game here, and it was more of an emphasis when they got to the mob game. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But that's sort of what was being said by Coach Planel's prior to the mob game. And then when you look back at this game against the Slashers, you see that it's a lot of the same tenets as part of the Buzzsaw defense. So it's double team whoever the best player is on the court for the other team. Let them get to the island and then disrupt their play on the island by being in their faces on the perimeter and doing a little bit of disruption or in and around that island. The Buzz offense also had some really nice highlights for me in this game. There was some confusion, and this is a thing that I've pointed out before about the Buzz, is that here's the but about their offense. They can sometimes overcomplicate things with the number of cutters they're doing because they've not got the timing down as well as some other teams, and so they're getting a lot of two in the tramp calls. And the other thing that they end up doing occasionally is, or not occasionally, it feels like the Buzz really struggle if their first option gets disrupted to reset into a new thing without, again, giving up something like a two in the tramp call. Most teams cannot do that, right? Most teams are struggling with the reset and how do we run this and how do we fix a broken play. But I do notice it a lot with the Buzz because I'm trying to work out what their main offensive options are, right? What was really interesting about their offense this time was the best play that they ran had multiple cutters going through the bottom tramp so that Karstens had to watch them, but none of them got the ball, and it was essentially a single guy drive to the basket. It was, I don't know if you would call it a stack drive, because it's not a stack cut because no one's receiving the ball, but I cannot remember who it was now for the life of me for the Buzz. But they came in from the side, went to the top tramp, and then attacked from there, while there was multiple people cutting in and around the bottom tramp. And so Karstens was just like, I need to watch all of you, and that's a lot to deal with. And what you can do with that is it's less people around that bottom tramp, less cutting, less guys who have to be aware of the ball as well as where they're going. Because if your job is you are cutting, his job is to cut. His job is cut. You don't need to worry about where's the ball coming from and what's this going to happen. You just need to worry about getting in and getting out and getting in and getting out and causing that distraction so that the guy with the ball can just get a score. Now, you can't do that every offensive possession because then the defense knows just to pay attention to the guy with the ball. So you do need to mix it up a little bit. You do need these drives that obviously the Buzz can do as well. But this sort of misdirect single man stack drive is really interesting going forward for this team. Height on the bounce is also a great offensive weapon for them, whether it's a single guy going at the hoop, or what was also interesting about this multiple cutters to the bottom tramp thing is they are creating an additional bounce in that bottom tramp, which when timed right from the guy driving can propel him upwards as well and over the stopper. So if you're timing an initial cut through the bottom tramp at the perfect time to get the guy with the ball coming into that creates more momentum for him going up and over the stopper. So that was great. The Buzz probably should have scored more in this game. This game should have been higher. And that's not to say that they disappointed by not scoring more. They had 4, 5, 6 different dunks that were nice, that were in possession, that were good, but they just smacked it off the back of the rim. Now the argument there is you should be able to get it in. If you're up there, you need to get it in. You've got to convert your plays. And if they'd lost this game, this would have been a much bigger deal that you need to convert the plays. But if anything, because they were winning and they were playing really well, it just felt sad that they were yeah, really cool. Oh, it's gone. It's that way. Oh, that's a shame. So that kind of sucked for them. But on top of what I was saying about, I said that their half-court offense needs some work and their reset needs some work at times. The reset also showed improvement in this game. There was a section where a play had got messed up and Jamal Barnes Jr. ends up getting the ball baseline. He comes in, I believe someone had cut through and then gone baseline, and Ralph Bellamy, who had initially got the LBR and then passed it to Jamal Barnes Jr., he then cycles through and he also cuts in from the side at the same time that JBJ comes in at the other side from the baseline, however, and sets up a really easy dunk for Ralph Bellamy because JBJ, we've had one cut go through already. JBJ ends up going towards the island, but he can still just try and score on his own, so Karstens needs to watch that. And then you have Ralph Bellamy coming in on the rotation from that side tramp, being the person who ends up getting the ball and scoring. But even if he's not, the phrase honor the ball has come up in the last couple of days. So that means that Karstens would have to honor JBJ with the ball anyway, and so it's two different options that he's got to deal with. And that showed a lot of poise. That showed a lot of, right, this is what we're going to do, and we're comfortable with this. And if they can replicate that on even more of their half-court resets, that's a really good development for the Buzz offense. You would just like to see that happening more. So Buzz did pretty well offensively in this game. A lot of it just came from total misdirection of a guy who Karstens did fine, but he's not good enough to keep up with a team like the Buzz the whole game. And then I think even though they end with 54-37, I think that 37 is the bigger number. Obviously the Buzz are known for their defense, and this was a really good game for them defensively. When it comes to the second matchup of the night, Griffins versus Mob, it was another 33-point victory for the Mob over the Gryphs. Another team who have got stopper issues, Connor Hollenbeck went out with an ankle injury yesterday. He did not return in this game. 2 days ago, I should say. He did not return in the game last night. So instead, they were running Matthew Wilkerson at stopper. And he was fine, right? He is better, he's your backup stopper. He's 6'7" and big, and I think he had like 13 stops or something. He had a decent number. But the thing I wanted to point out was something that I have theorized could be a defensive strategy, especially against the Mob, but is very hard to pull off because they can draw fouls easily. So what the Gryphs are doing is they've got their stopper, but they're also throwing one or two guys onto the padded sections around the tramps, right? Whether that be on the central island or on the other strips of padding either side of the tramps, they are allowed to put guys there. Those guys just can't make contact with the offensive players, intentionally, right? I believe this is the case inside the tramps as it is when diving into the tramps. The offensive player needs to make an effort to get out of the way of the defensive player. If the defensive player moves into the offensive player's way, or they are not paying attention to what's going on, it would be a foul. But if the offensive player just jumps into a defender, right, and doesn't try and get around him in any respect, that is like a no call. There's no charge. We've talked about this. There's no charging foul. But there is we just don't call it, and then likely the defense is going to get the ball. So what the Gryphs were doing was throwing one or two guys into this space, which was making the Mob uncomfortable, making them have to think about, what exactly are we going to do here? That pass isn't here because there's someone in the way. That pass isn't there. Oh, there's hands in my face. I've got to make a decision. There's so many bodies here. That can be quite a lot to deal with. It is a big defensive strategy if you can get away with not fouling. It disrupts their ability to cut to the rim from the outside because there's bodies that they would need to get past. And defenders can get their hands on the ball in lower passing lanes when the Mob are trying to dish it off around the bottom tramp, or just reset the ball so that the guy on the island can move. Kelly got a couple of those for the Gryphs in this game. Jamal Barnes Jr. in the main event matchup also got a couple of those for the Buzz. And it does work, but it can get exploited, especially by a team like the Mob, who we have seen do really well at drawing calls from the referees, with flopping may be unfair, but they're, extenuating what the call is to make the refs have to make a call. So it works to a degree, but here's where it doesn't work. Adam Stanford follows Cam Horton from the outside onto the island. And he does it in a way that he doesn't get called for popcorning, which in and of itself was impressive. But he follows him onto the island and he's right behind him. So there's a pressure right behind the guy. Now, what Horton could do in this situation, and he tries to do later in the game, and he has done in other games, is jump into the defender so that the referee has to make a call. The thing is, from that positioning where they were, Stanford had given him enough space, and if Horton just jumps directly backwards on the island, that's a travel. So that's not anything he can do. The problem is, Darius Clark manages to streak in from the top tramp, and like I said, the offense needs to try and get out of the defense's way, but the defense needs to be aware of what's going on, or else they are likely going to get called for fouls because they'll move into the wrong space. Adam Stanford is so focused on the ball, so focused on Cam Horton, that Darius Clark comes out of nowhere and goes straight through him and gets called like a defensive foul for interfering with the offensive player because Stanford wasn't paying attention. He kind of walks into the space and Darius Clark comes from the side and wipes him out. Is there concern that that's a super dangerous thing for the Mob to be doing and for an offense to be doing? Yes, that is slightly concerning. But unless you want to introduce charges, which would make offense almost impossible in this game because you just have guys standing on the island, this is not going to be that much of a recurring issue. On top of that, you can't always get multiple defenders into the island section in time unless that's like a half-court set. In which case, fine. But a lot of this game is fast court, is fast breaks, running up and down the court, and you don't have the time on a defensive possession to try and get multiple guys into the tramps. So you have to rely on your stop a lot. So it can work, but it can also be exploited, and it's hard to set up. The question is, what's the risk versus the reward? You'd need to see more teams run this strategy a little bit more often to see how many fouls you're giving over. how many violation points are getting given to the offensive team. Is that worth it versus how much you're disrupting their offensive flow? The refs do try to keep on top of it throughout, but it's a hard thing to manage, and that's obvious. The Gryphs, on top of that, we'll talk about the Gryphs, then we'll talk about the mob a little bit more. The Gryphs cutting looked a lot better in the first quarter, right? Their ability to get around the tramps looked great. What didn't look great was their passing. Obviously, you've got Gage Smith underneath the basket for the mob, a guy who, on this evening, Coach Trevor Anderson of the Ozone, who was in commentary, said Gage Smith is the best player in this league. He is a, fundamentally, he's a great player in this league. The best, possibly. Born to play this. We'll talk about another, the last line that TA has of the night is legendary cool. But we'll get into that. But Gryphs look a lot better. They just cannot get the passes off, and they end up making a lot of mistakes, like 2 in the tramp or 2 on the island, because they're like, we don't know what we're doing here. And Gage makes that a lot harder. John Shriffen, on the call, ends up saying, Mob have completely dominated the game so far at the end of quarter 1. It was 11-2. It is a 9-point lead, but I think that undervalues how much the Gryphs were actually bringing on the defensive end versus them coming up against an amazing stopper in Gage Smith. So 11-2 is not great, but against a team like the Mob, that's not a domination. That's a decent outing for the Gryphs thus far, is what I would say to Shriffen's. Defensive strategy wasn't looking bad, and Wilkerson did better than you'd maybe assume at stopper. The offense just doesn't come together, and how many times have we said that about the Gryphs? During the game, we had more jawing between players. Grant for the Gryphs ends up getting into it with Holloway and Hollins, mostly Justin Holloway. It basically was, I don't know even how that happened, because Grant and Hollins are the two that are getting very physical in the baseline. Hollins is kind of getting into Grant's face, but he's also kind of just playing defense. Like I'm talking when the play breaks down and they start to get chippy. Then Holloway comes out of nowhere and they go forehead to forehead. Or if you want some Scottish phrasing for the people who like how I say things, forehead to forehead. Head instead of head. But that's that's, I don't know why Holloway is the one coming out of nowhere to that. Is that just he's the guy who's going to get into it? And he definitely seems like he is as the game goes on. The last play of the game features Holloway almost breaking a defender's ankles, then pointing at him. He does a little bit of a dance later on just to show that they're winning. And I think that's getting dangerous, because the Mob being a no-nonsense, business-minded, we're going to win, that's cool for me. I've never really liked braggadocious stuff, personally, on a personal level. And I think it would make it a lot less fun if these guys are then clowning on their guys, because that's not fair. Yes, you're this good, but you've not won the championship yet. As their coach has even said, we've never, he's won championships. The Mob have won championships, but they've never won one during a full 8-team season. So they still have stuff to prove. Yes, you're 12-0 now after this evening. Yes, no team's anywhere near beating you for the first seed, but a little bit of humility in season 1. If you scorch the competition, you come back season 2, and then that starts the same way, by all means, keep up this energy. But all this is doing is fueling teams like the Buzz to get way more physical, and maybe that gives away a lot of fouls. But in the playoffs, one game, win or go home, and that could be bad for the Mob if they've made so many enemies by not just being great, but then not just being great, but adding to that by not being humble about it. And the coach doesn't help, but their coach is saying stuff that's accurate. In terms of, if you don't want us to score, you have to beat us, and I think the only people that can beat us are ourselves, and that's fair. I just don't think the players should be trying to antagonize the opposition. But that's just a me thing, that's just a how I do sports thing. I've never been that kind of person, so that's just on me. Gage Smith, I have not talked about him as much in this game. I've said he disrupted the offense. He has a situation in this game where you're watching his defensive strategy and he's watching the ball, and then as soon as a cutter comes, he looks at the cutter and then looks back at the ball. Then the ball goes outside the tramp, so he resets off of the tramp into the baseline, watching every single cutter. His head is darting everywhere on a defensive possession. He is watching everyone. He is working out who's coming from what direction. He was working out who's a threat and who isn't a threat. In a 3-person play from the Gryphs, it's 3-on-1. Gage jumps in, jumps straight back out because he realizes the guy who's coming to the tramp isn't going to be the scorer. He goes back into the tramp when he thinks somebody's coming. He does what I'm calling a hover bounce, where he's sort of bouncing low. He's maintaining a bounce, but he's not trying to go high with it. And then as soon as a guy makes a move forward towards the hoop that he has understood as that's the offense, he sinks down further into the tramp so that when they come up, he is going to his apex at the same time. Really impressive defensive stuff from Gage. We will be talking in a moment when we talk about the main event matchup about the concerns that were expressed early season that Gage is drifting. And that drifting is obviously dangerous and it sometimes can be hard to call for the referees, but you should be calling it because it'd be a massive offensive weapon, massive defensive weapon. But he's also doing some other things that coaches don't like as well. But even outside of that, anyone that's like, oh, he's doing this and he's doing that, including coaches, anyone who's like, oh, he's drifting or he's hitting them in the trap, whatever it might be, they always come back to, but he is also an incredible player. And it's things like the fact that he is paying attention to every cutter and he knows what's happening that adds to that. One last thing that I want to note on the Mob, 5 of their players were in double-digit points. 5 guys. None of them like higher than like 15, 16, right? But 5 of their 7 guys on the roster, 6 of which I think played, 5 of them had double digits. That's bananas. When I'm saying like, oh, if 3 guys get double digits, you're probably going to win a game. 5 guys in double digits, that is bananas. That's crazy. And it's also very cool. Again, it's just, you can nerd out about this stuff. But they won, by 33. And the main event matchup is another big win for the Mob. I don't know what to say about it right now. It's a Buzz 23, Mob 57. So this one ended up being 34 points. A thing I will note, no, we'll get into it. So Coach H says prior to this game, Stormy Bonatoni on the call interviews him and asks, what is your strategy to stop the Mob? And we talked about it with the Slashers, but I'll go specifics on what he said now. The strategy is double team whoever their best offensive player is, which you need to work out game to game with the Mob. So double team them. Allow them to get to the island, because if you just let the first guy get there, he's not going to be as much of a threat. It's the other guys. Because then what you're doing is you're trying to disrupt their offense outside of the island. Make the guy on the island have to wait and think about things and maybe give away a 3-second violation by getting in the face of the guys on the perimeter, getting in their way, trying to disrupt them and stop them from getting into the tramps and being a cut. Or getting someone on the island and trying to deflect the ball away, which is something that he didn't necessarily talk about as much. But does, like I say, Jamal Burns Jr. gets a couple of those little, just knocks the ball away on the island because the guy on the island is having to watch for cutters and you can just sort of pop the ball out. So more of that, but like we talked about, any sort of defense on the island itself can be a little bit difficult. Maybe they should be doing it more, but it's hard to set up. And if your strategy is more predicated on the perimeter, you can also just focus on that. You can't necessarily do both to a high degree. Maybe you can switch it up. Sometimes go perimeter, sometimes go inside. Maybe the answer is go perimeter when it's fast breaks and fast pace. Go inside and play around the island when it's, half court sets. Maybe that's a strategy. I'm not sure. I want to give a shout out to Malik Abdul Haq because I can't remember what happened in this game. I ended up messing up my notes, but he ends up landing awkwardly on his left ankle and doesn't return the game. So hopefully he's okay because he didn't light up the scoring this evening for them, but he's done a lot in other games, and he's someone that the commentary is pointing out is doing more and more, and just being a physical presence out there with his length. And you never want to see anyone get injured. And he goes down. Taekwon Scott in this game struggles a little bit. Mob are still able to get some deep cuts, even with that defensive strategy from the Buzz. They're able to get some of their strategy, some of their offensive work off, even if it's not as good as it usually is. They're still able to get some of it to go. And obviously Taekwon Scott struggling a little with the multiple options coming at him, and that's just because it's really hard to do. At points, especially on the fast break, he is facing 3 different guys coming at him if the defense isn't able to get in the way, get in position fast enough, and the Mob are just gunning. he has got a lot to deal with, and that's sometimes just too much to handle. Excuse me while I sneeze. He does get some good low blocks on cuts around the island. He's able to disrupt, but the mob don't use that bottom tramp as much as other teams. They use the island, and they use guys cutting in from the sides and from the top. And then when they need to, they'll use the bottom tramp because they can vary the offense that much. And there's just a lot that Taekwon Scott has to deal with. Ultimately, he's getting good disruption of the offense, getting in the way of drives, at least making the offense have to think. But the mob are just so good at getting to the basket that it's hard for him to stop. On top of that, he comes out of the first quarter with 6 seconds left as Ty Scott, and he's holding, his shoulder, his left shoulder. He does come back, he plays the rest of the game, but he's holding his shoulder. In the first game against the Slashers, I didn't touch on it because I wanted to talk about it here. He's also holding his wrist at points, and there's concern from commentary, is he hurt? And you're in the stopper position, that's the most physical position on the floor. You're having to stop the best offense in the league who are throwing 3 options at you at times. That's a lot to have to deal with, and if you're banged up multiple times in the day, that's just gotta suck if you're Taekwon Scott having to deal with that, With him coming out with 6 seconds left, what the mob do is Malik Abdul-Haq was still in the game at this point. He takes over at stopper, but there's sort of not a miscommunication, but he takes a second to get into that spot. And so Gage Smith just goes coast to coast with the ball with the 6 seconds left and just dunks it before Malik Abdul-Haq can even get in the air. And this is a play that you will notice the mob do more and more. I've noticed it throughout all of this game, and maybe they've been, and I know they've been doing it throughout the season. Is obviously they've got very advanced offense. Gage Smith is usually kicking the ball up or he's setting up in the half court. But then when it's the last play of the quarter and they have possession, it's just Gage Smith drive because he can get height and just go over the stopper. Or in this situation, they're not prepared for the offense to be coming that fast and he gets an easy 3-point. So that's why Gage Smith gets a lot of scoring. And some stoppers are doing similar things, but he's getting that opportunity way more. Going back to Shriffen saying 11-2 was a domination, mob are up 18-2 at the end of the first quarter against the Buzz, who are the second best team in the league. Commentary says it later on. They say they made the Buzz look silly in this game, and I don't think that's fair. I think it's so hard to beat them. It's very hard, especially if your stopper gets banged up. Buzz just can't get past Gage. They're really struggling in the half court with not making mistakes on top of that, so it's hard enough when the drive gets totally taken away from you and when driving and not just going from the outside tramps but going into the bottom tramp and trying to get up, when that's totally taken away from you by the stopper, it's just very difficult to deal with. And Gage obviously is the best at forcing teams to have to think about that. So they can't get passes off in the bottom tramp, so when they are creating options, they're not making anything of it. And they're making mistakes like 2 in the tramp, which I've talked about before. The Buzz sometimes do this offensively. I talked about it on the matches from 2 days ago. You'd like the Buzz to get a massive offensive punch, like a big offensive powerhouse guy. I don't know who that would be. If it's one of the McGee's maybe, or Bryce Moraine, if you were to put them onto this Buzzsaw team, swap them out for somebody, is that enough to get past the mob, right? Because you need to, they are winning games by shutting out another team defensively and then scoring enough to get past them. The game earlier tonight, obviously a much bigger score for them, but you need someone who can just get you an easy bucket on the other end, and it's so hard to do against Gage Smith. But you also need someone who can just score a lot, and I think the highest score from any Buzz player this season has been 20 by Jamal Barnes Jr. in a game. So, if you're not able to get your plays to work, you need something else to be working on your favour, and it's hard. It's very hard. And then the comparison is, again, Taekwon Scott's getting banged up. He's hurt. He's got lots of options coming at him. And so, in the second quarter, the mob end up getting a lot, and I mean a lot of just multiple, 3 to 5, just drives from the outside straight at Taekwon Scott and just over him. So, at halftime, it had started 18-2. At halftime, it was 33-5. So it just continued to be bad for the Buzz. The Buzz never outscored the Mob in any quarter. And that's hard innings, as they say. It's very hard innings. And that's because Gage Smith is so great and Tyquan Scott is just hurt. On what Trevor Anderson was saying about the importance of the second bounce, by the way. We talked about that from Tyquan Scott's perspective of jumping in at the right time from outside of the tramp to disrupt the offense. And I mentioned in the game between the Mob and the Gryphs that Gage Smith does this thing that I call a hover bounce. He's staying low and he's timing his leap, right? The difference between what he's doing and what Tyquan Scott is doing is Tyquan Scott feels like he needs to get out of the tramp to then time being the second bounce coming in, whereas Gage is sort of timing his hover bounce so that he can get the second bounce from inside the tramp. So there's less time where he needs to get out and get back in and get out and get back in. He can do it all from inside the stopper's box in that bottom tramp, hovering, waiting for a guy to come in, and then timing his second bounce off, which is impressive, right? Mob are getting away with running on the island. This is in the third quarter, by the way. They're getting away with things like running on the island, with half of their feet landing on the sides of the pad at the side, which isn't part of the island. And this has been a regular complaint from players and from people who have played and from people who have coached online, is that it just looks like the Mob are getting away with a lot of that stuff, and that's not fair. And it just needs to be consistent. I still need to go through the rules and double check about movement on the island. Do you get 2 steps? Can you move around? Is it sort of like you get a pivot foot like in basketball, where as long as one foot's planted, you're okay? I need to double check that, because the reality is right now the Mob are sort of happy feeting and they're not getting called for any sort of travel or anything, and they're able to get passes off. They're also getting some really lucky calls. There's a section where Malik Abdul-Haq gets called for interference on Gage Smith. So if you're on the offense, you can't purposefully try and take out the stopper. If they try to take out an offensive player who then dishes it to a different guy who scores, that's fine. But basically, Malik Abdul-Haq comes in from the top tramp and he sort of doesn't get his bounce quite right. I'll say it like that and then I'll explain why in a second. Doesn't get the bounce quite right, and he flies into Gage Smith, having tried to pass the ball away, and that gets called as offensive interference on the stopper. And that's an unfortunate call against the Buzz, because I think there's an argument to be made that Malik Abdul-Haq got hit by 2 Mob guys going into the tramps, and that's what disrupted his bounce. I would need to rewatch that, because the potential is that they just were physical, but they didn't hit him. And so that's enough to disrupt his bounce, and so he messes up on his own. But you could possibly relook at that and say, look, he got hit, right? And that should have been a foul instead of the other way around. Trevor Anderson says in the call that Brendan Kirsch is a master of referee manipulation. Now, what he means by that is that Kirsch keeps calling out violations from the other teams, and the refs keep blowing their whistle. And it's not the case that he's saying things and they're going, oh, he must be right, he knows his stuff, whistle. It's that he is noticing when another team's going to make a violation, and as they're about to make it, he is saying 2 in the tramp, 2 on the island, roughing the stopper. Like, he's saying it as it's about to happen, which is putting it into the refs' minds. They look at what's happening and they go, he is right, that is what he is saying, that is the call, whistle, other end. And that's not it is manipulating the referees, but it's pointing out calls that should be getting made, which as a coach, your job is to win. And part of that is trying to get as many calls for your team as you can that would get you in a position to likely win the game. And so that's what Kirsch is doing by pointing these little things out, and he's doing a great job of it. On the other end, you have Coach Planels, who the first stuff that I'm noticing that he's trying to point out is things like travelling, right? Like I said, little happy feet from the Mob on the island. He's shouting things like, he travelled. The difference is past versus future tense, right? Kirsch is saying, this is about to happen, watch out for it. The stuff that Hernando Planels is able to point out is stuff that has just happened. Isn't about to happen, but has just happened. So The refs can't make a call on what's just happened that they've missed. They can make a call on things that are about to happen that they are now being made aware of. But they can't go, yeah, you're right, I did see a travel there, I'll call it. And that's harder to do. The other thing that Planels is going on at, there was a lot of shouting from, it seemed like it was coming from him during the game, and I reached out to him for clarification on this because my understanding, because the commentary didn't talk about it, the broadcast didn't make it clear, it seemed like what he was saying is, Gage is drifting, watch the drift, the stopper's drifting, he's getting in the way of every single offensive possession, he can't do this, it's basically he's just saying watch the drifting. And so I wanted to ask him, can I double check, is that what you were saying, or was there something more to it? And what Planels said to me was, drifting is definitely a part of it. Again, this is another guy who was like, but Gage Smith is still amazing, right? This is the thing. He's still great. It's just, you want things to be called a certain way, right? So, Gage Smith is drifting, was the thing he was calling. But the other thing that he was trying to get them to understand was his arms are moving in the air as well, right? So, drifting is the foul of you move in the air outside of up and down. In basketball, you're asked as the defender, you have to jump straight up and down, right? If you come forward at all with your body, if you lean forward with your arms or whatever, that's a foul if you make contact. So if you go straight up and down, there can't be a call, right? Planels is saying that as part of drifting, the stopper's hands should also be in the air and you shouldn't be moving them. They should just be straight up and down. Now, I asked him about this because I think that's slightly unrealistic when we see a lot of stoppers get like blocks where they move their arm down to the side and swat at it and things like that. So I wanted to check with him, like, so are you saying that that should always be a foul or should there be room to move the arms? And basically what he was saying was he just wants it to be called fairly and evenly because he thinks that the mob are getting away with not just the drifting from Gage, but also him moving his arms and getting them in the way a lot more, whereas players like his Ty Scott would end up getting called for a defensive foul if they were to move their arms and swing as much as Gage's. And so what he's saying is, I want the game to be called fairly, because if we're balancing the calls, that means I can tell my stopper, hey, you don't need to go straight up and down with your arms. Your body does, but you can put your arms out the side and try and get blocks that way, right? He just wants to make sure that he's understanding if the call is changed from the rule book, right? So if we're going to call things a certain way, we have to call them all that way, or we shouldn't be calling them at all, right? That's kind of my opinion on it. The thing is, he and I had a conversation earlier in the day on Twitter about a defensive call of extending the arms defensively, and he sort of said, you know, what league is 100% of the calls made the right way? And I get that, but I think that in this conversation we're now having about moving the arms, that kind of does need to be what it comes down to, is either we're trying to get 100% of the calls right, and we get annoyed if they are wrong, especially if you're a coach. If you're a coach, you should be getting annoyed if calls are going wrong against your team, right? So what we should be aiming for is 100% the right calls, or getting annoyed if they go wrong. Because the alternative is to just say, well, who cares? Calls will be made, some won't be made, let's just play ball. I think it's way better to just hope or aim to get everything 100% right. And if things go wrong from a refereeing standpoint, you should call them out as a coach. And that's what he's trying to do here. So he's basically just saying Ty Scott should be given the same permissions as Gage Smith. If that's the call you're making, I can tell my stopper, hey, this is how I want you to play now. And that's what he was trying to get at during the second quarter, right? When they come back for the third, right, like I say, it's 33 down, 33-5 for the mob at the end of the half. In the third, Buzz get way more aggressive. And it's Terrell Howard and Jamal Barnes Jr. that are getting aggressive. Terrell Howard ends the quarter with 7, JBJ ends with 8. Terrell Howard starts the offense by doing what I can only describe as like the closest you're going to get to a basketball-style layup, right, which is low at the basket and you flick it off the glass and it goes in. And the reason I'm pointing it out like that is because what Terrell Howard was doing was he was coming in low and fast at the side tramp and not bouncing down, which makes the stopper think, right, he's going to try and dunk on me. But what Howard was doing was he is then flying forwards towards the baseline as Gage Smith is already in the air and flicking the ball off the glass so that it just goes in for a layup, which Smith could block if he wanted to. Like there's no, not like he can, any stopper can block that if they want to. Like, it's not like in basketball where once it's touched the glass, you can't touch it. as soon as it's up, you can just smack it, right? You can't put your arm through the hoop, but you can just smack it off the top of the hoop if you wanted to. But I think what was interesting about Terrell Howard's layup strategy for the Buzz is that it's just so fast that the stopper doesn't have an opportunity and they end up at the wrong side, or they're in front of the basket and they'd be reaching around, and it's just an awkward thing to have to try and deal with. So that was very aggressive. The first score for the Buzz of the second was Jamal Barnes Jr. with a massive, huge height, very aggressive thrunk, which is like you just throw the ball into it. So it was only worth 2, but huge play on Gage Smith, right? And I think the biggest thing from the Buzz was to come out aggressive and not worry about running plays in the half court as much, because obviously we're talking about 2 in the tramp and 2 in the island, and just it can get a lot to have to deal with. And instead you're just throwing guys with a lot of pace at Gage Smith and making him have to get physical in the air and make him have to worry about the offense, which is additionally beneficial for the Buzz because with Planell saying to the referees, watch the drifting, watch the hands, watch the drifting, watch the hands, they are trying to get better at drifting calls. They have been doing it more throughout the night in multiple games. And so they're watching that. And if you're Gage Smith and you know they're watching that, it makes it a little bit harder to get away with some of the stuff he was getting away with. You're in your own head a little bit more. You're like, right, what can I do? What can't I do? So good strategy from the Buzz. Just go straight at him, make him have to make a decision. Taekwon Scott ends the third quarter with a block on Gage as he's driving and then swatting away a mid-range jumper attempt from Horton. And this is, improved defense from them. The Mob are still getting dunks on Taekwon Scott from like single drives, and similarly to the Buzz, it's ferocious, it's aggressive, it's really strong play from them. And that's the thing. Like, if you have something you think you can beat the Mob with, the reality is their conditioning so good that they can also keep up pace, they can keep up aggression, they can keep up height because they've got some massive jumpers, but they're also coached really well on the offensive end. Their defense is a lot better than they sometimes get credit for, even outside of Gage. There's just so much to contend with this team. I had likened them to the 2004 Pistons. You've now got people on Twitter saying the 2002 Spurs, where it's just really beautiful slam ball. Gage Smith is the Tim Duncan, where he's just the big fundamental. Thing is, he can do more than that. He can score. And in this game, he had scored a lot. In the fourth quarter, Gage gets taken out of the stopper position with about 2 minutes left, and he gets put in at gunner. But even at that, he'd already scored something like 8 points by this stage, right? Before he got put in at gunner, he'd already scored like 8 points in the game. So he moves to gunner. And he sets maybe the first time ever in SlamBall. Definitely the first time in this revived season. Gage Smith gets a triple-double, which if you don't know what that is in basketball parlance, a triple-double is double digits in 3 different statistical counting categories that are of positive net, right? Not turnovers, but you can get, in SlamBall, you can get points for scoring, you can get points, you can get assists, you can get LBRs, you can get stops. I feel like there's something else. You can get hits, right? There's 6 categories that you could try and get double digits for. Gage Smith ends this game with 10 points, 13 rebounds, 13 LBRs and 11 stops, which is a not just dominant all over the court game, not just an all over the court game, a dominant all over the court game. And here is what, like, the thing is, he's just playing in the fourth quarter. Taekwon Scott gets called for a foul on the swiping of arms thing. What you're not allowed to do is swipe down at a guy. I think you should be allowed to make a play on the ball. If you're up here, if you're at the side, you can't swipe down at a ball on a player. That's a swipe down. That's a foul, right? And Taekwon Scott gets called for that during the game, during this quarter. On Cam Hollins, who was sort of coming up from the bottom trap. I think that's really unfortunate because I think that was playing the ball. I think he's fine, but the referees call it as a foul, and that's sucks for him. I think that was clean. This is where Planell's thing about what are we calling, how are we calling it, can we call it fairly? In which case, what am I telling my stopper to do? Right. He also, again, just fast breaks from the Mob as multiple guys coming at Taekwon Scott. He has to honor the ball, as the phrase is said. Honor the ball. So if a guy's got the ball, he has to pay attention to that guy. And then if the weak side defense on the perimeter is not there, he can't keep an eye on a guy who's cutting from behind him at the same time. That's really hard to do when you've got multiple guys in the mob who can do a lot in the air. And so you're getting a lot of baseline weak side alley-oop dunks, right? That's what I want to say in terms of Taekwon Scott was in a rough position in this game, and the fourth quarter didn't help, and he was banged up, and I still don't think they could have won with him there. I still think the Buzz need a much bigger individual offensive guy, but the game wouldn't have been a 34-point loss if Taekwon Scott was fully healthy, right? Back to Gage Smith's triple-double. They bring him up and let him play gunner, and they put Deontay Bird at stopper, right? Gage Smith was supposed to be a gunner. He ended up playing stopper in this league and was the best in the world. They play him at gunner, and he gets... Oh, this was the other thing. Before they move him to gunner, he has said in interviews and stuff with ESPN, he wants the stoppers to get in on the fun that the offense is having, and he wants to pull off a 360 block. And he almost did it. Terrell Howard drives just from the top tramp, right? And I don't know how Gage saw this, but I think this is the only time you can do something like this. He goes in and he does a 360 and tries to block the layup attempt from Howard. And it initially looks like he might have got it. Howard kind of is going to the side and he's trying to lay it up, and he just kind of doesn't whiff it, but he just doesn't quite get the height on it, and it kind of rolls around the rim instead of going in. So it wasn't a block from Gage. He's shown it's possible, but I don't know how he got the timing down to know that Howard wasn't going to try and go over him, but that he was actually going to go and try and go around him, because the 360 block wouldn't work if the guy was trying to go over you, because you'd just collide in the air, and then you'd probably end up getting really hurt. It only would work if you know the guy's going around you. And so I don't know how he saw that coming, but he's proven it's possible. He just hasn't done it yet. How did he get to 10 points? Right, he's playing at gunner. He gets fouled. It's a face-off. Who fouled him? Taekwon Scott. So it's Gage Smith, the stopper, the defensive player for the mob, going up against the Buzzsaw stopper. Taekwon Scott, big physical guy. Gage Smith gets his the first ever triple-double in modern SlamBall with a 360 through the legs thrunk on a face-off. He spins midair, puts the ball through his legs, and then is so high he just throws it into the basket to get him 10 points, 13 rebounds, 13 LBR, and 11 stops. That is history-making for Gage Smith. And maybe, as I'm saying, this is maybe one of those situations where I should have absolutely started this episode talking about this, but it's hard in a sport where you're building up to a main event every night. And so do I talk about the main event, or do I talk about the other games? Well, we talked about the other games, then we talk about the main event, but that has never been done before. And this is what I was talking about when I said Trevor Anderson has maybe one of the coolest calls he's going to have on commentary. There's a thing that was said years ago in SlamBall, which was that Stan Fletcher, the head coach of the Slashers now, but considered maybe the best SlamBall player ever, and the guy who invented the concept of freestyling, which is moving without the ball around the tramps while still being in possession. They said he came from a planet that already had SlamBall because he was so good at it. Trevor Anderson says, Stan Fletcher was the first guy to come from a planet that already had SlamBall. I think Gage Smith may be from that same planet. So Gage Smith is now not just the best player in the league, which coaches are saying. Excellent player. The best stopper. Front runner for MVP, and it might not even be close. Now what are we doing? He's getting compared to like the Michael Jordan of SlamBall. Right? That's crazy comparisons with a week left of the regular season and season 1 of this new thing. And having someone like that, there's questions about, are the mob bad for SlamBall? We'll talk about that on This Week in SlamBall, which should come out this Tuesday. Are they bad for SlamBall that they're winning by so much and winning so regularly? No, because then you want to find a team that's going to beat them, and that's a draw. But even when you're wanting a team to beat them, you're still watching one of the best players maybe to ever do it in Gage Smith. He might already be up there. You're watching him and you're going, wow, this guy's great. And you're going, yeah, I want the Mob to lose, but wow, this guy's great. And you can't help but watch him and go, this guy's great. And then you also have guys like Tony Crosby II, like, who is a face of the league in terms of what he can do on the tramps. You have Jamal Barnes Jr. for the Buzz, who's like he's got a look to him, and he's physical, and he can get some incredible dunks. And you've got like the finesse guys like Bryce Moraine, who whenever they're healthy are great. And this league has so many options that can grow it and can be personalities that the audience can look at. You just need to highlight them better, and ESPN needs to support it more. And you need more people like me who are out there just going, look at this thing and talk about this thing, and here's why it's cool, and here's what's good about what this guy's done. And I think it'd be worth saying at the end of the season, who are the faces of SlamBall after season 1? I think it's obviously Gage Smith and Tony Crosby II, possibly Ty McGee. Who are the 5 faces of SlamBall as it's returned? Great night of, seeing history get made makes it a great night of action, regardless of if the scores were big or not. I had a lot of fun covering it. I think week 3, teams have started to get used to what they're doing in a lot of respects, and we're just seeing adjustments be made week to week. And as a nerd for this has been so fun. And we've got another set of games tonight, and then we've got another weekend of stuff next weekend, and it's just all amazing. So thank you, Gage Smith, for getting a triple-double. That was cool to see, and how you did it was cool to see. Well done to the Buzz in terms of game 1, just being really good defensively, continuing to be scrappy, and using it to a certain degree against the Mob, and just, it's still so hard to beat them, but we see the template. I think more needs to be done around the islands, like the Gryphs started to do, but it's not an easy game to play against a team that's this good. Credit to everyone involved. Let's have a very quick look at tonight's matchups. Right, we've got 2 matchups in the main event. Ozone versus Wrath. With Ty McGee back, you'd expect the Wrath to win quite easily, but bear in mind this is the biggest rivalry in SlamBall, is Ozone versus Wrath. Is it going to get chippy? Is it going to get physical? What are we going to see? Or is it just going to be straightforward SlamBall? I think it's probably going to be the former, but we'll have to wait and see. And Lava versus Rumble. You don't want to... The Rumble are now getting much closer games, right? They won their first game, and it was by 1 point, and they lost to the Griffins in the first overtime game, right? This weekend. The first ever overtime game in SlamBall. So the Rumble are now getting close. The Lava obviously have like an insane point differential where they're losing by like 4 points at most on average, right? And so this is the battle of 2 teams who run it close, and it should be an exciting game, an interesting game. You hope the Lava can get their first win, but the Rumble are also looking better. I'd predict Wrath win and Lava win, and then Wrath win the main event. I can see that happening. And I will see that happening as games happen tonight on ESPN Plus with more SlamBall action. Thank you for watching or listening. Rate and review this podcast wherever you do. Leave comments in the YouTube comments section. Talk to me on social media if you want to talk SlamBall. It's been a great time so far this season. It's been a delight. Let me know what players you think are face of the league. And have a wonderful day. Enjoy the SlamBall action tonight, everyone.